And more crossfire in the Middle East, an intense round of Israeli airstrikes raining down across Lebanon. The attack came in response to Iran-backed Hezbollah launching hundreds of rockets into northern Israel. There's a war on the horizon. Joining us now live to discuss is John Sitilides. He's senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute and a former diplomacy consultant at the State Department. John, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be with you, Steve.
It's great to have you in studio, John. So President Biden, he was actually caught on a hot mic calling China's actions aggressive. Is this a fair assessment, and what does it imply for U.S. foreign policy in the Indo-Pacific?
Well, President Biden committed what we call here in Washington, D.C., a gaffe. He told the truth that he was not supposed to say. It's considered very impolitic. And if you recall, Steve, several years ago at a press conference, he called Xi Jinping a dictator. And we saw Secretary of State Blinken's head drop because he knew he'd have to deal with Beijing's foreign ministry over that matter. And so, yes, President Biden is absolutely correct here. China is being very aggressive, very belligerent against Taiwan, against the Philippines and all of its other neighbors in the South China Sea, in the East China Sea against Japan. We saw them clubbing scores of Indian soldiers in the Himalayas in December of 2020 and 2021. And so it has been a very belligerent country, continues to be that way. But I think right now they're concerned that Beijing will be firing back some very nasty rhetoric at Washington, D.C.
And somewhat out of order, our question set there, back to the Israel, war against Hezbollah right now, not Hamas, as that's ongoing. As Israel targets over 800 Hezbollah sites, is it possible that we're heading into an all-out war there?
Well, let's put this in perspective, Steve. Hezbollah has been raining thousands of rockets, almost 9,000, since October 8th, the day after Hamas massacred 1,200 Israelis last year. So this has been a war that has been fueled by Iran, through Hamas, through Hezbollah. 60,000 Israelis have been displaced within their own country. And there's really no responsible government that would allow tens of thousands of its own citizens to not be able to live a normal life in their hometowns and villages and cities. And so this, I think, is more of a preemptive strike by Israel against Hezbollah to ensure there is no wider war, because Hezbollah can rain enormous damage on Israel. It possesses 150 to 200,000 precision-guided missiles and rockets. And it seems what Israel is trying to do right now with the beeper attacks against the Hezbollah fighters last week, it's taken out most of Hezbollah's leaders, about 6 of the top 9. So rendered the communications infrastructure obsolete for now. And it looks like it's deterring, thwarting, preventing any type of a major Lebanese, or I shouldn't say Lebanese, Hezbollah attack against Israel.
Hezbollah does vow to keep striking Israel until there is a ceasefire in Gaza. With that said, is a ceasefire realistic? And what could Lebanon and Iran gain from this position?
Both parties have to want a ceasefire, and there's no indication right now that Hamas and its leader, Yahya Sinwar, have any interest in a ceasefire. As a matter of fact, Sinwar has been very clear his interest is in sowing regional chaos across the Middle East. He wants Hezbollah to help him out by attacking Israel to the north. I think the real question is, what do Hamas's and Hezbollah's paymasters in Tehran want? Do they want a wider regional war? And can China and Russia sufficiently influence Tehran to not spread a war that risks and threatens Russian troops in Syria and Iran's oil deliveries to China?
To your point, John, with U.S. troops now deployed to the region, an aircraft carrier was shifted from the Pacific into the Middle East region. What message does this send, not just to Israel, but to the groups like Hezbollah and Hamas?
That may take a few days to sort out, Steve. I mean, the problem right now is that the Pentagon has announced no specifics, no operational capabilities involved here through this enhancement. It's also odd that it comes 3 days after the Biden administration announced the withdrawal of 2,500 troops from Iraq. So we pull out 2,500 there. We're sending an undisclosed number back into the Middle East. But recall, we have about 40,000 troops in the Middle East, in Qatar, in Bahrain, in Saudi Arabia, UAE, Jordan, Kuwait. And so if it's 50 or 100 troops, I don't know that it makes a major difference. If we're talking about hundreds of troops, it could make a major difference, but we just don't know what the details are right now, so it's difficult to assess.
John, if you could sort of break down for us the capability difference, if you will, militarily between Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah to the north of Israel.
Well, as I mentioned, Hezbollah has been putting together for almost 20 years now an extraordinarily awesome arsenal of rockets and missiles, 150 to 200,000, maybe 225,000. It also has very well-tested, battle-hardened troops, very well-trained, very well-equipped by Iran. But what's interesting is that they are also Shia kindred of Iran, whereas Hamas are Sunni Arabs, and they are ideologically determined to destroy Israel, wipe it off the map, and it's still in their charter, as a matter of fact. But it seems that Hamas was not as prepared to deal with the Israeli response. They may have thought that there'd be U.S. and international pressure on Israel to end whatever response would take place after several weeks or several months. And now we're approaching 1 year. Hamas may be largely finished for the time being as a fighting force, but Hezbollah is a very, very formidable army. And if there is a war between Israel and Hezbollah, it'll be very destructive on both sides of that border.
John, just briefly, I want to get your thoughts. You mentioned the pager attack. What is your take on that? I mean, it's something out of a novel or a movie, really.
Right, yeah, James Bond, Mission Impossible, Jason Bourne, figure out the metaphor there. But I think what's interesting here is, first of all, on a purely operational level, Israel has been devastatingly successful in destroying Hezbollah's communications infrastructure. And if you're not able to communicate from leadership down to the platoons and divisions and brigades, you don't have a fighting force. So for now, there's really no ground force that Hezbollah can deploy against Israel. On a strategic level, I think a threshold has been crossed. I mean, we saw with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and Ukraine specializing in these very, very adept, technologically advanced, but very inexpensive drones to beat back the heavy armor assault from Russia. We have now another technology threshold that's been crossed, and that is the possibility of using electronic devices to destroy your enemy in the most precision-type strikes that maybe we've ever seen in the history of mankind.
John Sitilides, really appreciate you joining us.
Great to be with you. Thank you, Steve.